Alright, welcome to Stream Gamers. This video is intended to talk about the PMDG 737-700 variant, although I suspect the 600 and 800 and 900 variants will be the same. Our plan is to go over the setup, FMC, put together a flight plan using SimBrief, and all of the details necessary that I use to do a flight with as much accuracy as I can do. I'm sure people do it more accurate than me, but I prefer to have a fairly accurate way of doing it. I'm going to use a number of different tools to accomplish this. SimBrief is one of those tools. Navigraph charts, Little Nav Map is another one, and also SimBrief Panel. It's a new addition to the tools that I use, and I'll create some links in the descriptions and everything else so that you can see all these tools and how to get them and so forth. This is not a tutorial on how to use all of that information as such, but I will kind of do some detailed deep diving in some of it, and others will be a more general dive into. It's going to be a long video because I'm going to cover all of the systems necessary to get the aircraft set up, FMC plugged in, and getting it all functioning, and do some discussions about that as well. We'll look at the departure, or we'll look at the taxi, the departure, the climb out, the cruise, the top of descent, the arrival, approach arrival, and so forth. So we're going to look at all of that. It's a fairly short flight. We were flying from Christchurch in New Zealand to Auckland, also in New Zealand. A straight line flight is about 400 nautical miles. We will not be flying a direct to. We will be flying a chosen route based on what I believe is the actual routes these aircraft would actually take, leaving Christchurch going to Auckland. So without further ado, let's get inside the cockpit and let's kind of go over some of the stuff. Now, you can come down here and actually I'm going to discuss some keys that I use. So Control 3 and Control 7 are two keys that I use on a fairly regular basis. 3 is a look down at the FMC. 7 is an upper view of the overhead, and I can kind of pan down and click. I use the arrow keys on the keyboard to manipulate this view. So for example, I've gone to Control 7. Now I can do this, and with scrolling in I can look at a much closer view of various different components within the overhead. One of the reasons for that is if you just go here and try to view up there and try to pan up there, it's kind of hard to get up to the very top and see it. So Control 7, it gives you that look. The other thing we're going to talk about is the 4 quadrants of the overhead. This is line or quadrant number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. I don't know if that's the correct terminology for it, but that's what I use. For those that are flying at night, your dome light is here, your bright, off, and dim dome. We're going to be flying in daylight, so we're not going to have to worry about that as much. So let's get started. So the very first thing that we want to do is we want to start the battery up. Now, there is I had somebody explain to me that you have to use ground power in order to do all of this. I'm here to show you that you don't. You can use just the battery and the APU. You don't necessarily need to have ground power. So how do we do that? Well, we turn the battery on. That's this switch right here. Click that, battery comes on. I click on the emergency lighting, turn that on as well. So now we have that on. The next thing is in the system that we want to do is we want to start the APU before the battery drains. So aft pump, AFT, anti-collision is set on. Turn the APU to on. Brief second. Push it, start, hold, down. Now, what you're going to see is once that APU starts, and it already did that, it came off, this needle came off 0. This is the temperature for the APU turbine. It's going to ramp up here to somewhere around 8, 9 in that area. Once it's started, it's going to come back down. Low fuel is going to come off, and then you're going to see the generator lights come on. There we see it coming on. I caution to not turn the batteries on and wait for this process too long, because I've done that. And if you wait too long, you don't have enough battery power to actually start the APU. It's modeled very correctly, in my opinion, and so you want to be careful of that. So you notice the low oil pressure light went out because the pump or the APU is started, and it's going to come down to a stabilized temperature. I think it's around 4, 5. It looks like it's closer to 4. And you see the generator, the APU Gen bus is now alive. Push the Gen 1 and Gen 2, and away we go. So now we've come off of battery power controlling everything, and we've now running on the APU generators to provide all of the power necessary for the aircraft. Now we can, if we needed to, we could take some time. But be mindful not to take too much time, because as we load fuel in, we're going to load enough fuel to do takeoff. We don't want to load the fuel and then sit here and have this turbine running for 14 hours, not that anybody would, but if you get distracted and get called away and decide to come back an hour later while you're still sitting in this area, you've burnt some fuel, and you may then run short of fuel later on. So speaking of fuel, let's go down and look at the FMC, and so Control 3, and this is where we're going to do a lot of our, virtually all of our setup. Before we do this, we're going to set up our flight plan. We set up our flight plan using a tool called SimBrief. That is SimBrief. I'm just going to get it up on my screen so I can see it. So I had already created a flight plan, which is right here, previously, the one we're going to do. So I'm going to load that one up again, and we're going to start talking about it. It's in the view here, so I click on view, and there I can see the flight plan. I'm going to go back to the edit stage so I can show you some of the stuff that I've put in here. The airline, that's the abbreviated version of the airline. So for example, Air Canada is ACA, British Airways is BAW, and Delta is DAL, and so forth. There's YouTube video, or YouTube, not YouTube, sorry, Google. You can do a search for, what is the airline code, and you can find it. Flight numbers, I prefer to put flight numbers and airlines in as well. Even though I'm flying the 737 livery, I'm going to use British Airways thing here. So departure, that's the ICO code for Christchurch. That's the ICO code for Auckland. It's put in alternate for this as well, as if we're going to fly all the way back to Christchurch as an alternate if the weather is too bad. It seems odd to me, but maybe that's what you do. If the weather's too bad, you just turn on and you come all the way back. It would seem to me that there's other airports in that area that might be closer. New Zealand is not a country that has, piles and piles of international airports, such as the U.S. and other places. Okay, so unit measurements. I prefer to fly the Boeing line in pounds and the Airbus line in kilograms, just a personal preference. So given that we're in a Boeing, we're going to use pounds. I have Navigraph charts, and so therefore I use the current IRAC cycle, which is 2303. That's, you can see here the date, March to April 19th. As of recording, this is April 6th, so it's current. You don't need Navigraph charts to do this, but then keep in mind your FMC and your charts here may not necessarily line up. So although you can do it without it, so don't fret if you don't have Navigraph charts. You can do this stuff without it. Just the tools that I happen to use. So I would then hit save and save this, which I've done already, but I would hit save. If you want to share this setup that you have here, you can click on share, copy it, email that link to your buddy, your friend, whatever, send a Discord message, whatever you do, and that person can load this in and now have the exact same flight, and you'll be able to fly the same flight. Here is the flight as we're going to fly it. We're departing Christchurch. We are departing on runway 20, and we're arriving in Auckland on 05 right. Now these are dependent on obviously weather and that sort of stuff. but this is what SimBrief has given us. You can modify these flight points, because some might say, well, why do I got to fly all the way here and all the way here and all the way here to go around here just to get to this point? Why can't I just take off here and just go? You can. You could just do a direct flight and you don't have to fly any of this route in the fashion that they, coming here, and you could just go straight direct. I prefer to fly the route as if in a more commercial like atmosphere, like this is the route that the pilots would fly in real life. I presume that that's the case. Anyways, the other downside to that is not so much on the departure, but still departure as well. But on the arrival, it's very important. If you were arriving here and you were coming this way and arriving and coming in here, your altitudes and your speeds and your autopilot system, or the FMC controlling all of that, needs this distance in order to get to the proper altitude at the start of the feathers or at the final approach altitude. So it needs all this. If you remove these points out and just decide to come in this way, you've now kind of handcuffed yourself, because the FMC doesn't know what you're actually doing. It's going to try to recalculate that. But if you happen to be at 10,000 feet here, it needs this time to get down to the given, let's say the altitude of 2,500 feet. It needs that amount of distance in order to do that and maintain a reasonable speed. You can, nose it down and get to the altitude that you want to be at, but you're going to be probably, going 250 knots on final approach. And for 737, 700-ish, your final approach speed should be somewhere around 145, maybe 150, depending on wind and that kind of stuff. But you shouldn't be coming in at 200. That's way too quick. So just be aware of that. You can alter that if you choose. Right. So we then click on generate up here. Where are we here? There. We click on generate up here. And we click at generate the flight plan, and once the flight plan is generated, we then have the flight plan in its state that we could print off a PDF of it, so we had it for review. I have multiple monitors, and so I always keep them in here, but each to their own. I will also download the flight plan, because I'm going to import that downloaded flight plan into Little Nav Map. So now, speaking of Little Nav Map, we're going to switch over to Little Nav Map, and I'm going to briefly discuss Little Nav Map a little bit. Again, this is not to do a deep dive in it, but there's Little Nav Map. So I want to import this now flight plan that I have. I don't want to save that. What am I doing here? Hang on. New flight plan, don't save it. So I want to import that into Little Nav Map. And I use Little Nav Map kind of more as a visual reference than I do for anything else, but it just helps me to keep a track of the flight, right? So how do I do that? Well, I go to flight plan, I go to file, open the flight plan. Here's the flight plan, which you can see I've saved multiple times. So that's the flight plan, Christchurch to Auckland, open. It now puts that same flight plan that we saw in SimBrief, and it puts it in here. It's a little weird because it doesn't always give you the actual stars and SIDs. FYI, SID is your departure, star is your arrival. So it doesn't always put that in there. But this is more for my own purposes, to kind of follow the flight as I'm flying it. The little yellow aircraft you see there is the actual my aircraft. All of the other ones are AI and various different things. So it's not terribly important that it puts the star and the SID in there, but yeah. So that's all we really need to for now talk about. So let's get back to the FMC. So we got the FMC. There's a few things we want to do within the FMC in order to get ready. First, we want to look at the fuel. So we click on that, we click on fuel, and we notice that the fuel load is 24,970 pounds, but that's not what we want. According to SimBrief, according to SimBrief, we actually want 16,501 pounds. This is the actual burn that we're going to use for the direct route, just the route. But because you saw that we're going to do some fancy flying around, and we have to have enough fuel to get to the alternate, should we need to go to the alternate, we have to have enough fuel for a go round and that sort of stuff. So the true fuel that we need is 16,500 pounds, not the burn rate. This is the zero fuel weight, meaning this is the weight of the aircraft, including all its cargo and whatnot, but no fuel. This is the total fuel, or this is the total weight of the aircraft. That includes cargo, passengers, and fuel. Okay? And there's our cargo weight. So let's get this punched in. 16,500 pounds. Get rid of that. So 16,501 pounds of fuel. Put that in. On this screen, that's all I do here. Others may do more, but on this screen, that's all I do here. I go to the payload. One moment. Before we do that, I have been missing one step here. And that is, let's get the brake set. Now, for those that are setting the brake, if you have toe brakes, you have to use your toe brakes. You have to depress your toe brakes before you hit or select that button. If you don't, the brakes won't engage, nor will they disengage without the toe brakes turned on. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, let's get back into here. And let's go to the payload. Now, in SimBrief, it shows here we have 130 passengers. However, in the FMC, it says we have 8 first-class passengers and only 120 economy passengers. So we can't put 130 passengers in here. The most we can do is 128. To me, that's important because zero fuel weight will not line up correctly. So this aircraft has been configured for a first class as well as economy. In SimBrief, it's been configured for economy and all economy. So I'm going to show you how to go ahead and do that, how to get that set up so that you are comparing apples to apples. And FYI, various different people have helped me learn, whether it be YouTube, personal people that I know, friends, online friends. This tip brought to you by Razor. Those that know who Razor is, he's the one who researched this and showed me how to do this. So you know who you are, Razor. If you see this, thank you very much. So we go into the PMDG setup, go to aircraft, we go to equipment, and we go to, and I think it was page 14. 14, right. Cabin layout, 2 classes, single class. That's what we want. We want single class, return, 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 actions, payload. Now you see we have no first class passengers, but we have as much as 148 economy passengers. SimBrief tells us we want 130. There we go. Also, SimBrief tells us that our cargo weight is 7,150 pounds. I typically split that close to in half, the greater half going to the forward cargo and the lower half, or lower portion of it going to the aft. So in this case, I'm going to go 3,650 plus 3,500. That will, 3,500. That will equal the 7,150 pounds that SimBrief has called for. SimBrief has also called for a zero fuel weight of 116,725 pounds. I want to look at zero fuel weight. Rounded, it's 116,007.7. 25 is irrelevant because you round up. If it would have been 765 pounds, this would have gone to an 8. But because it isn't, it doesn't. There we go. So that is now set up. Back to the main menu. Now we go into the FMC. Here is where we're going to start talking about configuring the FMC for the flight in itself. Before we do it, we're going to go up here. And we're going to talk about the alignment of the IRS. Now, you have to have AC power, whether it be ground power or whether it be APU power, but you have to have AC power in order to do this alignment. You cannot do it off the batteries. Tried it before, it doesn't work. Quickly, while we're here, we'll talk about the dome light. If you fly at night and you want dome light on, this is where you do it. You can turn it off, you can have it on bright, you can have it on dim. This flight is going to be during the day, so I don't really care to have that. The alignment. We set the alignment, both alignment switches to align, and that's the DC, and then it switches over to align, which is now on AC. Then we turn it to nav, and we're done. Now we're going to go back to the FMC, and here we are. Click on position. You notice this position it's got no actual position in here. We can put a reference airport in, which I always do, so let's do that. Let's go NZCH, and we'll put a reference in. The gate, I don't know why, but I can't seem to get the gate in, and I think that's because I'm putting in like gate 22, gate 44, but there's another designator in there that I don't know where I'm now putting it in. So now we go to the next page down here, and we're going to pick, this is the right iris, and this is the right IRS, and this is the left IRS. They are pretty close to the same. Pick either one will work. I typically always pick the top one. And then we go previous. And because we have it in the scratch pad here now, when we click on that, we now have aligned the IRS. And you'll notice your displays look correct, whereas before they weren't fully lit. All right, go to the route. So, one final thing that I forgot to talk about, and that is there's a program called SimBrief Downloader. You get it from SimBrief, and you configure it. I won't go through the setup of that. I presume you guys all have that. But if you get it set up, you have to export the SimBrief flight plan from SimBrief into the simulator's flight plan directory. If you need to know how to do that, please let me know, and I'll kind of put a quick video on how to explain that. But for lack of a better way of doing it, I'm just going to export that in using the SimBrief Downloader program. Now that I've done that, our origin, where are we taking off from? We are taking off from NZCH. Oops, let me back that up. H there. We'll put that in. The next thing that we want to do is we want to put in the NZCH. Also, we want to type in NZAA. So the departure and arrival airport, that SimBrief Downloader program saves the file out of SimBrief and into SimBrief Downloader, and then from the SimBrief Downloader into the flight plan directory, which is within your sim. And again, I can explain that in another video. But that's the name of the file that you're looking for. If you put that in the scratch pad and punch that into company route, it now has the route, and it's loaded that information in, and we hit activate and we execute it. We now have that in. We can save it, and we can confirm it, and we can execute it. Now we're going to go to the performance side of it. Here are things like the fuel, the cruise. There's various different bits of information, zero fuel weight. So we can manually put this in, but because we use the SimBrief Downloader and push that file into that given directory, it knows about that information. So we can hit the request, and it'll just read that document and populate it. So we'll hit request. This will take a moment. It's trying to give you the illusion of computer time working and that kind of stuff, which it isn't. It's a direct read across from one little file that's been pushed over there. It'll take a minute or two, and then all of a sudden down here you're going to see this thing that says load. So there it is, and we hit load, and all of the data is now put in, with the exception of cruise wind. Now, this is where I talked about where we need to use we could use SimBrief panel. We could also just use SimBrief. So let's go back to SimBrief. Oops. And let's pull that up. There it is. So the average wind is what it's looking for right there. But I also have this program called SimBrief panel. So I can click on SimBrief panel. I can fetch the data, which is fetching it from SimBrief. And I can click weather, and there is the information. So the winds, average winds are at 310, 24 knots. Now, keep in mind, that's way up there, 24 knots. That's not ground, that's way up there. And that's the information that it's looking for. So 310, 24. And 310, 24 is what actually is registered in SimBrief. Those two are connected to one another, by the way. It eliminates you from having to go back and forth looking at the website as opposed to looking at the sim. You could just simply have this little SimBrief thing. So, because everything that is on the SimBrief on the website is now populated within here, if you really want it. There's all the raw data, there's your weather, your loads, so your zero fuel weight block and everything else, and the summary of it. I still use the website rather than this, but this is a neat tool if you choose to. You can get this from flightsim.to. Anyways, it's 310.24. Without further ado, let's put that in. So 310.24. Boom. Okay. N1 limits. Now, I typically don't do anything here. I leave the default in here, but you are able to change your profile of climb outs and all that kind of stuff. I just typically leave the default. If anybody knows more information about this page, please comment it in the comment section below, and maybe explain that to the viewers and how this works, and maybe even me as well, hopefully. Takeoff. So in the takeoff phase, there's a couple of things. I've gotten ahead of myself. Let me just back out here, and let's get to the departure and arrival, and then we'll go back to that. So the departure, the reason for this is your V-speeds won't populate unless you get your departure and your arrivals in. I don't know if that's normal, but that's been my experience. So departure, and we know that, or I know that our departure was set for runway 20. So runway 20. I also know, and I'm going to turn this on just briefly so we can see it, what I'm looking at. I'm looking at this route line right here to capture the information, both the SIDs and the stars, okay, and transitions if they are there. Okay, so that's what I'm looking at. So we're going to get out of here. We are using this right here as the SID or the departure, and we don't have any. We do have a Glen transition, so Glen transition, and we execute that, and then we go back. Now we go and do the arrival, which is NZAA Auckland, and we are using the 05 right. So there's 05 right. 05 right ILS, so that's what we're going to use. We're using a Davy 7D right here, and it doesn't look like we actually have any transitions within this, so we're not going to pick any transitions. We're going to execute that. Now we're done. We're going to click on init REF. That takes us back to this screen. We've talked about this. Flaps. So almost every takeoff, standard takeoff that I've done with the 737 is 5-degree flaps. There are extenuating circumstances behind that. So you have a short takeoff, you have an obstruction, fairly close to the airport in which you're taking off toward, and you need to climb out quicker and faster. You may change those, but 90% of the time I find that a takeoff flaps 5 is what we want. Center of gravity, because we've loaded that in previously, all you have to do is click on the CG and you'll see right there it is. Put it in. You can get that information out of SimBrief, but it's right there. Trim 6.41 is not necessarily 6 degrees of trim. It's the number. When you put your cursor there, there's the elevator trim. It's set at 4. We want that number to reflect that number. So 6.4. Let's do that. And for some reason, the pop-up will disappear if I don't move the mouse around. So that's why I'm moving the mouse around a little bit to keep it there. 6.4. Let's just roll and roll and roll and roll and roll. Sorry. I have a trim wheel. So that's 6.41. So that's what I'm doing now, is I'm just spinning my trim wheel. Now, sometimes you can't get the exact number, and it kind of triggers from, say, in this case, it might trigger from, say, 6.40 to 6.42. I've never found that as being a big issue, but try to get it as close as you can. Notice that the V speeds now have been populated here, so you can just simply click them. This 136 is important to remember, because when we go up here and we want to set your throttle, we're going to set that throttle for 136 or whatever is indicated there plus 10. So in this case, 146. Again, I have an autopilot panel, so I turn the buttons and dials down here, not necessarily on the screen itself. We want to find out what is the runway true heading, departure heading. I do that using Navigraph. There's many different ways of doing it, but I do it using Navigraph. So now in Navigraph, because I've got that flight plan entered in, I can go to import a flight plan. That's by selecting flight, import a flight plan, import from SimBrief. And with any luck, it should work. There's the flight plan. So Christchurch to Auckland. I'm going to load that flight plan. There we go. So now we've got that flight plan in here. Now I've got lots of information in here, such as runway headings, weather, and all of that good stuff. So I'm going to click on Christchurch, and I'm going to click on information, and I'm going to click on runway, and I know that we're departing on runway 20, and so therefore I know the bearing of that runway is 196. So that's important to me, because in the heading, I want 196. So this is, if I decided to just hit the autopilot and not use the LNAV VNAV, just click on autopilot and hit heading, it's going to fly that heading. I'm doing this all in preparation that I may not actually use it. Now we're going to talk about altitude. So altitude, so remember, we didn't actually fully discuss that. Let's get back to, again, let's turn off that and let's turn on SimBrief, and let's look at SimBrief for a second. So altitude, there is this thing right here that says 35,000 feet, and people think that that means that that's your cruise altitude. Yet, myself included, I got caught with this many times. It actually says the initial altitude. That isn't necessarily the cruise. It just means we're going to go up to 35,000. But what is our cruise altitude? Well, our cruise altitude is actually here listed cruise altitude 39,000 feet. That's the number that's important to have here. Now, I know people are going to say, no, actually, that's not true. What you want is here is you actually want to do the step up. So you want to say, okay, your initial altitude or your departure altitude, climb to 4,000 feet. Then by this point, get to 6,000 feet. By that point, 10,000 feet, and so forth and so on and so on. And you can do that. I typically don't do that. I'm not there yet, but I probably will eventually. But what I do is I always set this at the 39,000 feet, or the actual cruise altitude. Was it 39,500 or was that 39,000? Yeah, it was 39,000. So I set it to 39,000. So now I've got my speed set for rotate. I've got my heading set, the heading that we're going to depart on. I've got my altitude that I am intending to cruise at set in. I've got that done. Our next steps are, and we're getting pretty close to the actual, let's get this thing pushed back and started up. There are people that are using ATCs, whether it be VetSim. There's a whole host of them out there. I can't remember all the names. VetSim comes out for me is what I think most people are using, but there's Pilot Edge, I think it's called. And anyways, I don't use ATC. The ATC within the sim seems somewhat broken to me, and it could just simply be my inability to use it and understand it properly, so I don't use it. I fly using FMC and the given paths and lakes and so forth that we should be flying to. So we click on lakes. Now I'm going to go through the flight plan, and if we don't have, we do. So we have a discontinuity. Some people, myself included, are saying, well, why is that there? Like there's some error there. That's not how it's supposed to be. That's not true. That just simply means that at this point, ATC should be telling you what you need to do. I don't want that. I don't like it because, again, as I say, I don't use ATC. How do we get rid of that? We select the waypoint beneath the discontinuity. It goes into the scratch pad, and we put it on top of these little 5 little squares there. We then execute that, and we've removed the discontinuity. Vectors are the same. If you see vectors in your flight plan, that just says that, hey, ATC is going to vector you in, meaning ATC is going to tell you how to get from here to there and do this and do that and do this based on certain circumstances. Traffic, weather, I'm sure there's other things, but I think those are the things. Keep in mind, these are things that I believe this is how this works and why this works this way. I could be wrong, and if I am, please somebody send me a comment in the comment section. Those that want to comment in the comment section, understand this is made for all ages, including kids, and I prefer to keep my channel stuff clean, family orientated. I don't appreciate language of any sort, so please don't post things of language because they'll get deleted. But by all means, constructive criticism is welcome. If I'm doing something wrong, please tell me that I'm doing it wrong. And if you're able to explain why I'm doing it wrong and how to do it differently, would love to read the comments. And our viewers, the viewers looking at this stuff would probably take great pride in knowing that they're doing it now the right way, not just because I thought we should do it this way. Right. So we've got this set up. We've got the aircraft pretty much ready to consider startup pushback. There are a number of different ways that you can do startup pushback. You can just manually push the aircraft back and start up both engines at the same time and that kind of stuff. I typically don't like to do that. I like to do all of this stuff with as much realism as I can get with it. Okay, And before I start any further, I'm not going to explain what lights should be on at this point or at that point, because I don't know enough about it, and B, I've seen so many different YouTube videos about you got to have this on, you got to have that on, and then the next person doesn't do that, and they say you got to do this and you got to do that. So I'm not sure, and I've never done the research enough to understand the lightings as much as I should. So I'm going to put things on that I typically do, and I'm not going to kind of justify why I do it. I just do it that way. Right, here we go. You would normally want to stroke is on. You would normally want to call into the ATC and say, hey, I need a tug, and get me ready for pushback. Give me authorization for taxi and all that kind of stuff. Again, I don't use ATC, so I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to do a pushback, and I'm going to use the pushback built into here. Many different pushbacks out there, but I'm going to use this one. So we have this attached. So we have to get rid of this. We also have the chocks also in place. So we need to remove this before we get our tug here and get ready to push back. So let's just go inside the cabin again. Let's go back down here and let's go to the main menu, FS Actions, Ground Services. This one right here. When you click on this, it's going to remove the chocks, it's going to get the staircase out, and it's going to close the door. So you don't have to go do all these three things individually. Just simply click on that. It's removed. The door is closed. The yellow chocks are gone. The truck is going to back away. Shortly, it's going to back away. There it goes. See? Backed away. Okay, so now let's plan our pushback. Let's plan the pushback and how we do this. So the one thing that we're going to look at here, I'm going to show you, is we're going to now talk about Navigraph. So within the charts, in the departing airport, under taxi, there's this thing right here. Click on that. It then shows you the actual airport taxiing chart. Okay, we are here, we are departing here. We need to push back, and we need to push the tail that direction, i.e. we need to push the tail in the right direction. So when you're using pushback, it's about what direction is the tail going in. So when you click on Request Pushback, there are no pushback tugs available. Isn't that unfortunate? I would have liked to have gone through this. It's not a tutorial about pushback, but if there was a tug available, we would hit pushback, and then we would be given a command that is right, left, and stop. In this case, I would push back. I would let the aircraft push back to a certain point here, around here somewhere, and then I would tell it to turn to the right, so we push the tail back. So and we would then at that point in the pushback, we would begin the starting of the right engine. Always start the right engine first, and then we start the left engine. But because we don't have this capability, we're going to cheat a little bit. We're going to use the slew mode. Slew mode is press the Y key and press the number 2 on the number pad. That turns it out, but pushes it back, and then the number 1 key to get a bit of a right turn. So that's assuming we have now pushed back properly, and we're going to press the Y key. There we are. Use your pushback systems as you will. Apparently Christchurch does not have, for the ramp, a pushback tug. I don't understand, but that's okay. They don't. Done. All right. Now we're going to go into the startup cycle. The startup cycle is pretty easy. We have the fuel pumps They all need to come on, and we won't turn on the center pumps because the center pumps are level of fuel is not such that there'll be a lot of fuel in there, if any. So when I turn them on, you're probably going to stay low pressure because there's no fuel in them. So we'll turn them off. Okay. We still are running APU. So now when we start, we're going to go to look at the starters. So we're going to look at the starters themselves, which are both starters, a left starter, a right starter. I'm given to understand that pilots would, today use that starter, that side of the starter, and then tomorrow they'd use that side of the starter. They wouldn't use both at the same time. I typically don't do that. This is the right starter switch. This is the left starter switch. In the start mode, you would select this to ground, and you would wait for start. And there's more things along that. But before we get there, we're going to talk about the heating and air conditioning and so forth. I should have had this turned on and the packs on to provide heating and cooling in the cabin. So when we start the engine, or when we start an engine, we need the APU's compressed air to spin the turbines. And so we take the compressed air away from the cabin and we push it into the engines to get the engine spinning. We do that based on the APU bleed. So the APU bleed is just bleeding air off the APU as it's running. We stop it from going to the packs or to the heating and cooling part of the aircraft. We use the isolation valve. We turn the isolation valve on and we isolate the air to the engines. That's what we're doing here, okay? So now we're actually ready to spin the engines over. We have air going to the engines. If we hit the starter or this switch here, what we're going to see is this engine start to rotate. So let's do that. Click. And all things equal, there it goes. It's now starting to rotate. It's rotating based off of the compressed air from the APU, pushing it, isolating it to that engine. So now it's spinning and the temperature is coming up. Typically once the temperature hits that 21 degrees, we turn on and we push fuel into it, like so. When we do that, the engine will start to come alive. And you see it right there. The engine is starting to come alive. It's going to build some oil pressure. The start valve was open. This was on, but now it's off. And the oil pressure is going to start to build. On this side, not this side. So the oil pressure has built. When the engine is started, that switch is going to click to the off position. It should be another minute or another 30 seconds or so. There, it is now started. We can now turn on the generator. These are the generator switches for the engines themselves. So that generator is now on because that engine is running and providing power. We're going to start the next engine. So start valve is open, oil pressure is low, EGT or N2 temp is coming up. Again, once we get to 20, there's 20. We're going to dump fuel. The engine is starting to come alive. So obviously, not obviously, it's my opinion. I could be wrong about this. If I am, go ahead and comment in the comment section that I am, and maybe explain it to me the right way. But the way I understand it is we are spinning that engine over. It's spinning, 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 spinning. And as it spins, it's getting hot. And as it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, you dump fuel into it. The fuel ignites, boom, the engine comes alive. I'm sure there's more to it, but now the engine is alive. So the engine, the valve has gone to the off position. We're going to turn on that generator. Now we no longer need the APU generator because we're running on the aircraft's engines and their generators. We turn the APU off. We now put packs to auto, isolation to auto, and APU off. APU bleed off, I should say, because we're no longer using the APU for air anymore. It's now the turbines or the engines themselves that are producing the air that is necessary to put heating and cooling through the packs and the air conditionings into the cabin. We now go up to the overhead, and we want to turn on windscreen heat, probe on, electric pumps on. Instead of hydraulics, we are turning on the electrics, and yaw damper on. Done. So when we look at a while ago, I talked about this whole overhead panel business. Oops. And the quadrants. And we look at the quadrants. Click on that one more time. No, we'll discuss it through this view. So when we look at this, we see no orange lights, no warning lights. Everything is good. Everything is looking good. So there's nothing in here that's telling me, for example, if I had that, I would see that orange illuminated light and go, oh, wait a minute, there's a problem. So we'll turn that back on. So there's nothing in here that's telling me that the overhead is not configured the way it's supposed to be configured. I come over here and I click on this enunciator panel just to make sure all of the lights are actually working, which they are, and I let go of it and I have no faults, no errors. Done. Perfect. Flight directors are coming on. I'm going to arm the auto throttle. We're not going to use the autopilot yet. I'm going to turn on the VNAV and the LNAV in preparation for departure. So now when I do this, all I have to do is hit the autopilot engage on, and as long as my speed is somewhere in that 180 to 200 knots, as long as I'm in control of the aircraft and the aircraft is taking off the way it's supposed to, it's going to arm, and I'm going to take my hands off the controls, and away we go. Before we begin our taxi, we're going to put our taxi lights on. We're going to put our runway lights on. Again, this is this is how I do it. Right way or not, I don't know, but I just put them all on and away I go. And I almost always forget to turn the taxi lights off before I go. And I almost always forget to turn the runway lights off and the landing lights off after 10,000 feet. I almost always forget to do that, but you are supposed to do that. Right. Center up our view. Disengage our brake. Give it some throttle. And the aircraft starts to roll. So, as we looked before, we are going to taxi out to runway 20, and if you see the chart here, we are going to taxi out this way and then go this way, and then we're going to sit there and get ready for our departure. Now, I use the Alt key, and I bring up these two screens for later usage, so I can see, various different tidbits of information as I'm flying. Because quite honestly, because my eyesight is terrible and I need to do that. I've really buggered this up, haven't I now? That's okay. That's all right. I've hit the runway. I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. So I'm gonna taxi over here and get off the runway and get on the taxiway where I'm supposed to be. The beep beep sound that you hear, if you push the throttles up too much to get it to start rolling, you get this warning. I'm not sure what that warning is, but I do know that if I throttle up too much, I'll get that warning message. So we're just about just about back on the taxiway where we belong. There we go. Now we're in the taxiway. So we'll just taxi all the way along. Down here. Like I said, we'll get ready for the departure up there. And away we go. So when we get ready for our, gain the runway, get onto the runway and get ready to go, there's a few things we're going to kind of sort of talk about. We're going to need to do, or we'll talk about that now, kind of, so I hopefully don't lose control of the aircraft. This little screw right here, why it's there, I don't know, but it is. But that's the toga, or your takeoff speed has been set button. It seems weird, but that's where PMDG put it. You could have put all kinds of buttons all over the place, but they put it there. Anyways, so when we get ready to actually start trundling on down the runway for our takeoff, the V speeds, I believe, are around 135. So you're going to hear V1 rotate. And you're going to not see me rotate on rotate. I typically let it go a little further just because I feel more comfortable having a little more ground speed to take off. You can, when it calls rotate, you can pull back and start lifting the aircraft off. I typically don't, but you can. We're going to take off and we're going to start to climb. And once we get what is called a positive rate of climb, and you should hear an annunciation for that, it's going to call for the gear up. So we're going to push the gear up. I have a panel that I do, so you won't necessarily see me go over here, reach here, and push the gear up, but I will be pushing the gear up, and I'll call it as well. Typically, I'll call it. Once we take off and we start getting some control of the aircraft and it's departing, and we get our speeds in around the 180, 200 knot range, we're going to reach over here and we're going to turn on the autopilot, and then the FMC is going to start controlling, along with autopilot, VNAV, and LNAV is going to start controlling the aircraft and should be doing everything for us. We'll talk about this briefly. So here is we're going to take off and come around here like this. And we're going to, let me just broaden that out a little bit more. There we go. Maybe not. Maybe a 20 mile is. So it's going to take off here. If I don't achieve my speeds of around 180, 200 knots, then I will manually hand fly the aircraft till such a time I do. And then it will pull itself in line with the profile and the flight path that it's supposed to. So here we are. Let us not forget to turn off the taxi light like I said I would. It's hard for me to see which one is the taxi. There's the taxi light off. The runway lights are on and landing lights are off. Okay. So I like to have a kind of a predetermined viewpoint or view advantage for when I do this. We should be looking right and looking left to see that the runway is clear and there's nobody coming in. Of course, if you had ATC, somebody would be telling you that. And away we go. We're going to roll up here and get on the runway. When you're taxiing, I didn't really follow that well this time. Typically I do a lot better, but I'm also being distracted with trying to explain how and what I'm doing, and apparently that's hard for me to do, I guess. But you shouldn't be taxiing more than about 20 knots. If your speed indicator comes up, you're going too fast. So We're more or less lined up. We're going to push the throttle forward a little bit to gain in rolls and get some speed before we push it up to around 85 to 90% in that area. You can watch kind of down here the speeds that we're going to be going at down here. Oh, my head's in the way. Anyways, so let's push it up. Let's get it rolling. There we go. V-knot. Oh, I forgot to hit V1 rotate and rotate. Positive rate of climb suggests landing gear up. So gear is going up as indicated by the red lights here. 200 knots. Autopilot is engaged. LNAV, VNAV are locked in. The aircraft is now getting itself onto the profile or onto the flight path. You can see that as it's turning and getting itself on it better. I was flying just a little off to the side of it. If I look outside the aircraft, we are configured, climbing. We're going to now slowly bring up flaps. There's our flaps up. And here we go. I identified that there was a mistake. I don't know if you caught it. Most pilots would likely have caught what I did, that fly to that level that I fly at. So I will come clean on it. Mostly because I prefer to be as accurate as I can. I did not have my flaps set, and that was a problem. The enunciating warning message was in part caused by that, I believe. But most importantly, I should have actually had my flaps set. So it's not just enough in the FMC to say flaps 5. You actually have to physically push the flaps down and get them set to flaps 5. So flaps 5, for those that are not aware, there's your flap 5. And I did not put my flaps down, which I should have. Anyways, you can see I took off regardless of doing that. It was a little goofy on the takeoff, and it was goofy on the takeoff because I didn't have flaps. Now my speed climbed considerably faster than it normally does, again because I had no flaps. So, having said all that, here we are, flying away. Now, there's little to do between this point and the top of descent point. So on the flight display here, if I were to take this out maximum distance, of course the flight is not very long, so we can see there's the T. It's hard to see it, but there's TC or top of climb, and there's TD or top of descent. Here's the airport we took off, and there's where we're going, so we can see both. When we go down here and we click on PROG, it tells me we got 112 nautical miles before we hit top of climb. Likewise, after this is done, can't get to 280 knots at Davie. That's interesting, because it's top of climb, top of descent are too close together, I guess. Anyways, I want to bring that a little closer in just to make sure we're still following. Yes, we are. So once this gets to top of climb, meaning we're at our cruise altitude of 39,000 feet that we said we were supposed to get to, you're going to see this switch over to top of descent, or TD, and it's going to tell us how far it is between here and top of descent. Now, in NARAF, and there are other places to get this data as well. It may not be 100% accurate, currently live with any changes around the world that are actually happening. And you may be stuck in regions that don't provide good information, but there are other free charts out there that you can research and find. There was a friend of mine who actually showed me where there's this one chart, but I can't remember what it was called now, so it's kind of irrelevant. Anyways, let's look at the Navigraph charts and information that we need to know about for Auckland. So click on this. These are the various different places for charts. So there's a star, which is the arrival and the approach. So the star and the approach. And the approach is runway 15, runway 5 right, ILS. So if I want to look at that chart, click on that. And there it is. So we need to be at 3,000 feet before the feathers at this point right here. Our ILS frequency is 110.3. It's going to also, oh, I know what it is. I know what I'm doing wrong. Okay. If we had, early on, I think I talked about Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3 approaches. So Cat 1, 2, 3, Cat 1, 2, and 3 approaches, from what I understand, are for auto landing, meaning the aircraft can auto land. It can bring itself down and put itself right on the ground. It'll flare. It will compensate for wind and everything that it needs to compensate to put that thing down on the ground, usually pretty accurately on the center line. There are things that you have to do, and that is once you touch down, you do have to do the reverse thrust. But outside of that, it deploys speed brakes. It pretty much does everything. You will know that you have a Cat 1, 2, 3 approach on this chart. It will be listed down here. There are other charts that show that as well, and they don't necessarily put them down here from different places that I had mentioned earlier, but there are other charts. In this case, I'm not going to do a auto land because I don't have it. What auto land means is it uses both autopilots with the same frequency to control that. Exactly how it works, I don't know, but it does use, you will use both autopilot for that. So as you got closer to it, and if the airport had Cat 1, Cat 2, or Cat 3 approach, as you got, virtually within the feathers, I think that's where it starts, you would engage the other autopilot and it would lock onto the ILS and control that auto land for you. We won't do that. But we will use the ILS landing, and we will use the frequency. So 110.3, you can come down here to the radio, right here, and you can go 110.3. Now, I don't know if this is the right way to do it, but I always do this now, because if I don't do it now, I more often than not will forget it later. I speculate that you shouldn't need to do this now. This might be a more down the road thing, because you may all of a sudden with ADC, they may all of a sudden, because of weather or whatnot, they may all of a sudden tell you, no, don't land on that runway, or land on this one, use this frequency, use this approach, use that approach. So they may change that for you. In my case, it's not changing. I'm landing 05 right, ILS, frequency 110.3. That's what I'm doing. So, right, here we go. Let's check in on our FMC and see where we're at. We are 84 nautical miles before top of descent. Good. Now, I forgot one important ingredient, haven't I? We need to have this dialed in for 39,000 feet, and I didn't do that. Shoot, I forgot to do that. Normally you would, on ground, you would set this for your cruise altitude and your arrival altitude, and it would control the pressurization of the cabin accordingly, right? So you would need a different pressurization of the cabin from 15,000 feet to 39,000 feet. Likewise, you would have to change the pressurization of the cabin that you had at 39,000 feet when you started to come closer to runway elevation, say 500-600 feet. The pressurizations would be somewhat different, and so you would have to make these changes. I forgot to do that. But when you were on ground, you would do that as a part of your pre-flight setup and that kind of stuff. You would turn this dial up, and you would get it to go to 39,000 feet, and you would turn this dial up to your actual runway elevation, proximate runway elevation. So in this case, 23 feet or 15 feet. I would set this at 50, and that would be close. Now, there is a automatic version of it that does work, and then there's the manual version of it. So we are in auto, so we're going to leave it at auto, and we're going to let it do whatever it does, and hopefully I haven't bugged this out. Apparently the auto has failed. So let's use manual. I can't change it, so that is a problem. I hope that we are not. We're at 28,000 feet right now, so presumably everything is going to be okay. But you would normally have this set at an auto, and you would turn this up to whatever you need to turn it up to, and that would be that. If it fails, we'll work around that, but that is a blunder on my part. Likewise, icing. We're flying in a climate that we don't have to worry about that. We could look at things like temperatures and stuff like that, and see what is the weather here like. We can do that. We can do that here. Weather. So 2 degrees. We can also look at our navigaph, our departure information, weather. So we got a ceiling of 5,000, broken to 5,000. Temperature is 8 degrees Celsius or 46 degrees Fahrenheit. That's here and there. If you've got moisture in the air, if there's clouds, weather, and that kind of stuff, it's probably not a bad practice to at least have your wings anti-ice on. But these are things that you have to manage it based on things like temperature and precipitation and that kind of stuff. It's not a good idea to have engine anti-icing on ground. It's just not a good idea. From what I understand, you can burn this stuff out. So unless you need it, don't just turn it on and leave it on. Turn it on as prescribed, as needed. So we are going to continue to fly here, and we're going to probably, as we get closer to our top of descent, we're going to start talking about that kind of stuff. So for right now, I'm going to mute Mike, and we're going to just leave the flight alone. And again, you'll be able to fast forward this so-called dead space, dead air. But I will put some scenery out here, and then we will be back shortly. Okay. So you probably saw me creep in here a little bit ago and then turn the video off. I'm not so great with the whole content creation and all the stuff, although I'm trying to get a little bit better, and I've done some setups here to try to make things look a little bit better and flow a little bit better. My whole plan, one of my plans, is to start producing a little bit more of this type of content, more informational than anything else. And having said that, this is not intended to be, an exact way a pilot should be flying, because I'm not a pilot, and not even close to being a pilot. Anyways, so let's see where we're at. Our top of descent, as I said before, has changed from top of climb to top of descent. We are 168.7 nautical miles to top of descent. So let's talk a little bit about approach, top of descent, functionality. A lot of what we're doing here is, in general, the same whether you're flying 737, 787, 747, and I suspect, not that I've done it, but this 777 as well. And in principle, it's transferable to the Airbus line as well. Buttons, functions, features may be a little slightly different, but a lot of the stuff is similar. One of the notable differences between, excuse me, thirsty, good ginger ale. Anyways, one of the notable differences between Airbus and Boeing is FMC as opposed to MCDU. Do you know what those acronyms stands for? One is Flight Management Panel. Flight Management Panel, Flight Management System. Yeah, FMS, Flight Management System. MCDU, I don't know what the abbreviation is for. Anyways, off on a little tangent of where we go. Right. The Boeing has a clear top of descent. It's indicated on in a little notation or a little marker here on this display. The Airbus or the fly-by-wire Airbus A320 does not have that. It has a calculation system that you can calculate what should your top of descent be based on a 3 degree glide slope, 5 degree glide slope, or a 3 degree descent, I should say. You determine that, and it'll tell you, hey, you should start descending X number of nautical miles before the airport. Then you can see in the MCDU how far you are away and say, okay, it says I'm supposed to start my descent at 113 nautical miles away, and I am 113, boom, start coming down. But you have to do that. You have to calculate that, and you have to understand what you're going to do, and you have to push a button to begin its descent. That's the Airbus A320, crafted or made by fly-by-wires. The A310 does show you a top of descent indicator, but you still have to push a button in order to have the aircraft start its descent down. The PMDG 737, I suspect the 787, although I've never tested it, but I think it does the same, and I'm assuming all the variants of the PMDG will do this. Not only do they have an indicator here of your top of descent, where your top of descent is. This is you, the aircraft, the little triangle, and they'll have an indicator somewhere within that range of the flight plan where your top of descent is. In this case, it's indicated by this little green marking. This is 160 nautical miles from you, and so it's something less than 160 nautical miles. So we can look down here and see, yes, it is 144. Anyways, so the Boeing line, once the aircraft passes that threshold, it will begin its descent, assuming you change the altitude. If you do not change the altitude, it will not begin its descent. The Airbus line, some are going to say, well, you have to do that in the Airbus as well. True, you have to do that in Airbus, but you have to also turn your altitude down and then also push another button to get it to start descending, because it will not. In the Boeing 737, the PMDG, all you do is turn that down, and then also push another button to get it to start descending, because it will not. In the Boeing 737, the PMDG, all you do is turn that down, and then also push another button to get it to start descending, because it will not. In the Boeing 737, the PMDG, all you do is turn that down, and it'll begin its descent as soon as it crosses that threshold. Don't be alarmed that it doesn't, the second it crosses it, it doesn't start coming down. It's actually going to pull the engines back. So typically you're going to see these engines throttle back from the 88% to something different than that, and usually drop it down a fair bit, because if they kept the engine spooled up at 88% and dropped the nose at 3%, 3 degrees coming down, the speed is going to get itself out of control. And the only way you're going to be able to regain that control is slow the aircraft down enough or pull the throttles back enough to regain its control. But if you do that, you will start descending more and more, or the aircraft will reduce its descent rate. And if you reduce its descent rate based on the prescribed descent rate that it should have, you will not be on profile, meaning you will not be at the designated height on final approach that you should be at. And if you're too high, it may miss the ILS entirely. So it's quite a game to control your descent rate versus your speed together, so that all of that happens, that you will get to your 3,000. In this case, let's turn that view back on. So in this case, as we looking at this before, we want to be 3,000 at this waypoint. So if it didn't pull the throttles back and it built up too much speed, it would have to reduce the descent rate to regain the speed properly. And you may not be at 3,000 at that waypoint, LENGU. So, or I refer to it as you will not be on profile. So meaning you've got the right trajectory of the aircraft coming down with the right speed, because as I mentioned earlier, I believe I mentioned earlier, you cannot be at 3,000 feet because you dove the thing down and you're now at 250 knots at that point. Because if you're at 250 knots at this point at 3,000 feet, you've got some 10 miles here to reduce that speed. You probably will, but you will probably be breaking all kinds of laws in some area that you're going way too fast. You should, at this speed, at this point of the game, you should have your flaps should be set, your gears should be down, which you shouldn't be going 250 knots with flaps down. You'll tear the flaps off. So that means you can't deploy flaps until this point. But anyways, at this point, you should be fully configured. You should have your flaps down, full flaps, typically full flaps, but if not full flaps, at least 25-degree flap. You should have your gear down, locked and ready to go. You should have your auto brake armed and set for whatever predetermined auto brake you're going to intend to use, and I'll go over that here in a bit. You should have your speed brakes armed and ready to go. So let's talk about auto brake and how I use it and why I use it the way I use it. So in your auto brake system, you have, in the Boeing, you have 3 settings for this auto brake. And then you have this other set for anti-skid. That's typically used on departure. I didn't use it, but that's typically used on departure. So the auto brake 1, auto brake 2, auto brake 3, the way I understand it, is just different levels of braking. So if you have a short-ish like runway, and you have a tailwind, because a tailwind would suggest you come in a little faster than you normally would. If you are going to land a little longer, not intentionally, but if you do land a little longer, you probably want to have more braking. But you also want to be careful not to put too much braking, because if it's a slippery runway, in principle, you're going to skid. You're going to slide. So there's a balancing act. So anyways, you choose the auto brake level, the amount of auto brake, depending typically on runway length. So let's look at runway length, shall we? So let's go here and let's go to our arrival. Let's look at runways. So we're coming in on 05 right. We have a runway that's 11,598 feet, which is a lot of runway. I mean, I could bring this thing in on a 5,000 foot runway. Not that I think you're supposed to, but I can. So 11,000 feet is a lot of runway. So do you need to have auto brake 3 heating up the brakes to slow this thing down with full reverse thrust and everything else? No. Even if you land long, you got oodles of room. So I'll likely set auto brake for 1. I will arm the spoilers, and I'll probably put on auto brake 1. When we come in on that landing, we're going to be coming in, and we're going to be just over the threshold, hopefully with a good flare and the aircraft at a point of stall, because the way I understand it, that is the way an aircraft lands. Is as you come across that runway, you need to have the nose up or flared. That's kind of the nose up, and it needs to be on. And I use the word stall, but stall may not be the actual word. But it should be descending, meaning you shouldn't have lift at this point. You should have minimal lift at this point, and the aircraft should be starting to come down, working its way down, right? So that's the important thing is to have that aircraft, coming in, at some kind of an angle and descending, and timed out so that it hits the threshold area at the right speed. Not descending too fast, because if you had it at stall, it would impact the runway and brake landing gear and all that kind of stuff. So when I say stall, those that want to critique me, I understand that maybe that's not the right choice that I should be using. Anyways, so that's auto brake. We want to make sure that we have auto brakes set for auto brake 1, because we got lots of runway, plenty of room to get this thing stopped. The next thing that we want to talk about here is we want to look at the weather. So the arrival weather is the winds are at 200 at 6 knots. Now we're coming on runway 6. That may not necessarily be the correct runway based on the wind, but it's only 6 knots, right? So even though the wind is blowing out at 200, so it's a little bit northwest-ish, ever so slightly northwest-ish, and we're coming in we're coming in on the east, so we still have a nose wind-ish, side nose wind-ish. That's probably the best scenario for us. Our visibility is 9,999 meters or greater, meaning it's clear. Our temperature is 15 degrees, dew point I don't understand, humidity I don't know about, care about, and altimeter is 1001 hectopascals. Pascals? HPA, I can't remember what that stands for. Anyways, I don't use that a lot, but those that want to land more correctly and actually want to do this properly, you should go in and set that up and put those parameters in. I'm not going to do that because this is not necessarily, well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say this isn't a tutorial for that, but it probably is, but I'm not going to do it. I want to touch briefly on TCAST. So TCAST is an emergency system that allows the aircraft to deviate if necessary because there's another aircraft or another obstacle in its way. So you normally would have TCAST on, and it would be warning you of aircraft within the area flying around and within your safe zone, so that the aircraft would say, first tell you that this is a problem, but then react to that problem. Meaning, let's say if there was an aircraft that was approaching me, that was going to come across my flight path, and there's a potential of collision, and it's a slim potential of collision. It does this still on. It will change my flight. Now, I don't use TCAST because you fly into a lot of these bigger airports, and there's all kinds of people flying around with different levels of the way they like to fly. And it's frustrating to me that if I'm coming in on an approach and now somebody decides, I'm on say a 10 mile, 15 mile final, a 15 mile final, and somebody decides that they can get in front of me, well, my TCAS is going to roll off and it's going to divert me from that final approach. And then I have to fly a go around, and I'm okay with doing that. It's just that if you fly these airports where these F-18s are buzzing around all over the place, and there's so many different aircraft, people not following these types of rules, first come, first serve type of a thing, you may find yourself struggling to actually do a nice, proper landing. So I turn that off. But for those that want to turn it on, and natively or defaultly it is off, there's your TCAS right there, and you can turn it on. Right. So we are 68 nautical miles from top of descent. At some point, I don't know when that point is or if there's any restrictions on it, but at some point before we reach top of descent, we want to turn this dial down to the 3,000 feet. Now, the other thing we want to look at is in the charts, in the start, the Davy, what was it, Davy 7D? Let me go look at that. Yes, Davy 7D. So Davy 7D right here, this is the chart that we want to look at. So we can see as we're coming in, this is the route we're planning to take. We're going to come through here, and we're going to come in. Right? Now, I suppose I should probably, well, it doesn't matter. I'll leave it here. And this is the route we're going to come in. So some of the things that we have to be aware of. We have to be aware that we have to be above 8,000 feet and 280 knots a Davy. And we have to be here above 5,000 feet, 240 knots. And you can see the pattern that it's taking us, and it's eventually getting us to 3,000 or above 3,000. So let's look down here in the ATC, in the FMS, under legs. So the A indicates above, and if there was a B here, it would indicate below. So at Davy, we want to be above 8,000 feet at 280 knots. There was a warning message in here that we saw earlier that talked about this 280 knots as it can't achieve that. Why I put that in there, I don't know, but we're going to change it. I can see we're 259 and 240, so likely if I were to put 245 or something like that in here, we would be fine, and that's what we're going to do. 245 / execute. Done. That's how you change that. Now you can change any of these parameters according to what you wish. But understand that if you want ATC, if you want ILS and the computer system management system to manage this for you, it has to be within the guidelines in which it can achieve it. That message that I got down here earlier, let me just make sure that I'm not getting ahead of myself and forgetting about top of descent. I'm gonna quickly dial in top of descent here. We talked about bringing it to 3,000 feet. If I don't do this now, I'll get to explaining something and we'll cross top of descent and it'll be too late. You do have to have your top of descent, you do have to have your altitude turned down in order for it to cross top of descent before it starts coming down, as I mentioned before. Okay, so now let's go back into here and let's just discuss this just ever so slightly here. So, as I was saying, you want to make sure that as you change these things, that the aircraft can actually achieve it. And if it can't, typically it's going to tell you that, like it did. It said, 280 knots. It can't achieve 280 knots at Davy. Because, the reason why I can't is because here, it's slowed down to 259 knots. Now, in 17 nautical miles, it has to climb increased speed while descending. It has to increase speed while descending to what they had here was 280 knots. And why would you be 280 knots when you're supposed to be at 8,000 or above? That means you have to hold an altitude of at least 10,000 feet. Then 10 miles later, it wants to go from 280 down to 240 and stay at 5,000 feet or above. So all of these things are telling us that the aircraft will not be able to accomplish that in all of those settings. You know, go down to 259 knots at 18,600 feet and then climb that speed back up to 280, but be at 8,000 or above. It's very contradictory in how that is, and that's just one of the things that happen when you import the flight plans. Sometimes those things don't make a whole lot of sense. Anyways, so that is just something that you when you're looking through these things and you're making decisions, if you want to modify it, by all means go ahead, but understand you may be modifying it to the position where the aircraft cannot do what the FMC is telling it to do, and you may find yourself getting frustrated not being able to either A, do an auto land, or B, in the right configuration for just an ILS approach or an RNAV approach. You may not be in the right configuration, and then thinking that there's a problem when all along the problem may have been your alteration. So just be aware of that. Okay. So back here, we are coming in on this approach right here, and here it says 3,000 or above at this waypoint. As we looked at before, let me find that plan here. Now, where did that thing go? Hang on. Approach. There. So, as we looked at this before, we want to be 3,000 right here. So when I look down here at the next page, there's that waypoint right there, 3,000 or above, and that's exactly what it's telling us. It's telling us 3,000. This one doesn't necessarily say or above 3,000. It just says 3,000. This one also says 3,000. So our waypoint UGRUS, which is right here, is 2,000. Here it's 2,600. What's going to happen is, because we are coming close to our top of descent and we've set it for 3,000, it's not just going to continue to drop its altitude to 3,000. What it's going to do is it's going to adhere these altitudes. So we are coming to this point, and when we get past this point, which is right here, just beyond that is our top of descent. At some point, it wants to be at POKOM, it wants to be at 259 knots at 18,500 feet, not above or below, at 18,500 feet. So it's going to start its descent. If it gets to 18,500 feet, before it gets to this waypoint, it's going to hold that altitude until it starts to needing to descend so that it can achieve Davy at above 8,000 feet at 245. So we're just coming on our top of descent right here. It appears that we are 11 nautical miles away from our top of descent. And as I said before, don't be alarmed that when it crosses top of descent, you don't see this start to come down immediately. Often, it's going to throttle those engines back a little bit, and sometimes it happens really quickly. It's just like bang bang, and it starts coming down. Other times I've noticed it actually takes a minute to go across the top of descent because it's throttling down. Other times I've noticed that it starts to throttle down just before top of descent, and then so at top of descent it starts to come down. So we'll see how that actually takes place. We are 6 nautical miles from top of descent, so it's going to start doing that. And again, you can keep an eye on the engines and what it actually does. They're set now at 88%, and it should pull those engines back. Okay, 3 miles. this red ticker tape here on here, that's an overspeed. So if you ever find yourself getting your speed into that red area, that means you're overspeeding. Make sure you check your flaps, because that could be potential. If you got your flaps down, you could cause an overspeed condition. Just so make sure your flaps aren't down. Likewise, there we go. See the speed pulled back, and it's starting to descend. So a good rule of thumb is 210 knots is, or a good rule of thumb that I use is 210 knots is flap 1, flap 2 in that area. Once I get to 200 knots, I start bringing my flaps down. We want to make sure that we're at full flaps, on our final approach. We want to talk about this little indicator right here. This is considered what they call as profile. Profile meaning you are at the right altitude for where you are in your descent, right? So this is telling me that I am about 47 feet, 45 feet too high for where I am, which is irrelevant. It's important to note, when I made a comment earlier about you can alter your arrivals and your departures, but in your arrivals, if you eliminate steps, you may find yourself not enough miles to reduce the altitude, and you may find your profile being out of control. You can be, at times, you might find yourself, thousands of feet on the wrong side of it. And if you are, you will not intercept the ILS, and you will find yourself having to do, if you're doing it properly, you'll find yourself having to do a go-around so that you can get onto profile for the approach, right? And again, when I talk about profile in this area here, I'm talking about being at 3,000 feet at this point. If we are at 3,000 feet at this point, at maximum 210 knots, at this point, we are going to be in good shape. We can look down here and see, no, not that, this button. We can look down here and we can see at this point it wants to be 210 knots, which matches the chart, above 3,000 feet. This one doesn't say above, but we talked about that. So I'm going to be flaps right there. Now, remember I said at the feathers we want to be configured. We are still 2 miles away from the flap, or from the feathers. And so I may have said that a little bit too soon. I may have suggested flaps have been weighted a little too long to be fully configured. But that's typically what I want to do, is I want to be fully configured by the feathers. So that may be, 10 miles previous to the feathers, where, you got your flaps are being deployed, gear is coming down, speed is bleeding off. And we probably want to come in somewhere around 140-ish to 145 knots. If we had a tailwind, we might come in a little quicker, maybe 155 in that area, 150, 155 in that area. Because a tailwind messes around with the amount of lift over the wings based on the speed. And I may not have said that correctly, but that's the way I understand it. So you got a tailwind, you probably want to come in a little quicker than what you would normally would. But don't be coming in, if you're coming in at 145, don't think you got to come in at 180 now, because it's way too quick. You're not. You're going to be way too quick. That doesn't mean that you can't land the aircraft at 180. I find it difficult. I find that the landing, the touchdown on the ground is always harder. Like, I always get more impact on the ground. And then of course it's you got to get the thing slowed down. So when we talked about auto brake 1, if I was approaching at 180, I would not use auto brake 1. Auto brake 1 would probably still do it, but I would probably at least use auto brake 2. So let's think about some pre-landing configuration. We talked briefly about auto brake, so we're gonna arm the auto brake. We haven't talked about the spoilers. So the spoilers, if you put your cursor there, you push the spoilers back. But if you put it down, You then move it into the arm position. If I remember, I believe that's the way it is. It's now actually armed. So that's what we've done. We'll just briefly look at this one more time. Let me turn this off. Let me just look at this again. So what I was pointing out is the little up arrow as opposed to the little down arrow. The up arrow and the down arrow. The down arrow does the auto arm, and this one takes the auto arm off. That's the way I understand it to work. Where our profile is still within 33 feet. If my profile here is within, I don't know, maybe 500 feet, I'm not overly worried about it. 500 might be at the far end of it. When we get in contact with the ILS and we're established on the ILS, we're going to see this turn into a full diamond, not a half diamond. Like right now, you can see it just a bit of, it's like a half diamond. There'll be another diamond shape back here like this, and the same thing here back here like this. This is the right to left profile. This is the up and down profile. According to this, we are not necessarily aligned with any of the profiles because we are too far away for the ILS to actually be picked up. If I understand correctly, you've got to be is it 20 nautical miles to the airport, 25 nautical miles to the airport or something to that effect, in order for it to be able to align that all properly and show you those full diamonds. I'll be careful to, you notice that I'm trying to be careful about saying things that I'm not 100% sure about, but when I am positive about something, I'm typically going to say, this is it. And a lot of what we're talking about here, I'm not 100% sure. It's just how I do it. Okay. So we are still on our descent, just blasting along here. We got somebody there. Headley chicken, nice. Headley chicken. So we're coming down. We're at 24,800 feet, and we're working our way down. Like I said, we're working our way down on profile. We are, for the most part, we're configured where we need to be. What we will do additionally, as we get closer to the feathers, we will put on the auto approach button, which is this button right here. And the auto approach button is then going to connect us to the ILS that's on the runway and position us right to left, ideally in the center of the runway, right to left. It's going to do most of the landing or most of the approaching for us. We are going to, once we get, probably some, 1,000 feet, 500 feet off the runway in that area, I will be all configured, and because we don't have a CAT approach, I will then decide to disengage the autopilot, disengage the auto throttle, and then manually bring their aircraft in the rest of the way. Depending on the conditions and visual, I may do that sooner, I may do that later. It all depends. Ideally, I like to do it as late into the process as possible, so I don't get, because sometimes I find myself, I get kind of a little weavy back and forth trying to maintain center line, and the closer I get to the actual touchdown, the less I do of that, and that's a me problem. It's not the simulator. That's my issue. I tend to overcorrect sometimes, and because of that overcorrection, that causes that weaving back and forth. So let's not suggest that there's a problem with the sim or the aircraft, because there isn't. Okay. We are within 20,000 feet. Now, you should be, we are on standard barrel. So the, not a barrel, altimeter. We're on standard. Typically at 18,000 we'll turn that off. Different regions have different requirements. I don't know what the requirement in New Zealand is, and so I typically try to use 18,000. Other places that I don't know because North America is 18,000, I believe, and Europe I think is 6,000. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's 6,000. So those are the things that we need to keep in track of. Basically what that means is when we use a standard altimeter reading, we don't correct for the ground. I should be careful about what I'm saying. I won't say any more about that because, again, I'm not 100% sure about that. I don't think I'm explaining that. I won't explain that properly. Anyways, so 18,000 where we are at right now, we're coming to 18,000. You notice how the aircraft is leveling off? And that is likely because it's beginning its descent again. See how far it is off of profile? That's going to be a little alarming. And that's why it's reducing this whole coming down. And it's getting further and further on the wrong side of things. We'll leave it alone. Now, I did make a change. Remember, I did make a change to this number right here. This was at 280 and I changed it to 245. I'm guessing that's the problem that we're under here. We're still not so far that we can't find a solution for the problem. We're 1,800 feet and it looks like it's trying to come back a little bit, and we'll see if it does come back. There's a couple things we can do to try to resolve this. We could manually control the descent rate, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let it continue doing what it's supposed to do on its own. You see here this indicator, it's requiring drag. So I put up the speed brakes to get some drag. The FMC is having a problem to getting to this supposed above 8,000 feet at Davie in 6 miles. You see how far off profile we are at? So it wants drag to try to bring itself into profile. One of the problems was because I reduced the speed. If I would have left it at 280, it would have had no problems getting down to that above 8,000 feet because it could keep speeding. But right now it's trying to slow down to 245 while reducing altitude, and that lies where the problem lies. So we'll put drag on it and we'll let it continue to produce drag, and hopefully a sufficient amount of drag that it will be able to get itself back onto profile. So it is coming back. See that? It was at 17. It's coming back. It's getting closer and closer to within profile right now. We're still 800 feet on the wrong side of it, and it's getting worse now. I think we're going to be okay. Although we are getting close to where we need to start thinking about, what is the game plan here? We'll let it continue. We're past our standard pressure. So let's go back into here and let's press the V key to reset the actual altimeter to what it currently actually is. Yeah, we're 400 feet off of it now, so I'm not worried about this. Now, you notice how it said 8,008, which is 8,000 above, and we've passed that threshold. Keep in mind, we need to be above 8,000. That's not necessarily to say that we need to be as close to 8,000 as possible. If you look beneath us, we got some hills down there. We got some bumps down there. And they're just simply saying, hey, do not get lower than 8,000, because if you do, you could hit a bump. So stay above 8,000. I see our profile is right on target again. I'm going to take the speed brakes off. If you look here, we're pretty much on profile again. You know, we're probably in pretty good shape right now again. This is what's called a banana. The banana is the profile. It's the measurement of, will we be at 3,000 where we need to be at 3,000? That's what it's telling us. And according to this, we're going to easily be at our 3,000. And according to this, we are as well. So we keep coming. Now, what I like to do is at this point, I like to get ready for my arrival. So I come in here and I look at my charts, and I look at my taxi charts for Auckland. Click on that. There it is. I'm coming in right here this way, right? So I want to look at, where is the terminal? What gate am I intending to go to, or approximate gate, because I can't control which gates are actually available for me. But I'll likely come into one of these gates over here, which means when I come in, I'm probably going to get it all wooed up if someone's around here. So I'm probably going to have to, taxi into here, taxi back this way, and keep coming. And the most important thing for me is which way do I taxi off? Do I taxi off to the right? Do I taxi off to the left? So in this case, I'm going to taxi off to the left. And I'm putting that all mentally, I'm putting that in my head to tell me, what am I going to do when I get on the ground? Because I've always had this problem, get on the ground, and then I got to start looking around. Where am I supposed to go? Now, pilots, I would imagine, they understand these airports, and they know, our gate is this gate, or our gate is that gate, and so we're going to go here. And if I landed long, then I'll go off on this taxiway, or I'll go off on that taxiway. So that's what we're doing there. Let's go back to. I don't know why I keep losing that one. Anyways, let's go back to, is it star? No, approach. Runway 5. There it is. That's the one I want to keep on looking. I want to keep that up on the screen. So let's get rid of this. And get rid of that for 1 second. Sorry about that. I need to step away for a second. All right, now here we are. Let's dial this in a bit, and a better bird's eye view of actual approach, so you can see we're going to come in, swoop around, and come down, and we're coming along. So as we come around here and we turn backwards, like turn back toward the airport, that's probably when I'm going to hit the approach, and I'm probably going to wait till we start getting into the decel. This area here is this little green thing that we just passed is called decel. We're going to start decelling or start reducing our speed. You notice that decel, the indicator here is here that it's trying to get down to that speed. So what I can do is to help it along, a little bit of drag in there. See, I would have forgotten, just reminded myself now, I would have forgotten to switch those ILS radios over, but because I did that previously, we're in good shape. So we're turning, we're getting lined up, our profile is still good. And this is about where for me, the magic takes place. So I'm going to drop one notch of flaps. And notice the red line is there. If I were to go to the second stage of flap, we're starting to wind her down now. I'm going to bring up and arm spoilers. Another notch of flaps. Gear is coming down. Auto approach is engaging. Seems odd the way it's lining up. Now it's moving over. Another notch of flaps. Something isn't lining up correctly. We haven't gotten the ILS. We're too high. Nope. Drop out. Let's go. Seems like the approach is really steep coming in here, and it doesn't look like it's going to actually achieve it, but I mean, it is coming down. Seems high to me. When I look outside the cockpit, it seems very high to me. So let's disengage. Let's let it come down. Yeah, we're way too high. We're going around. We got a really long runway, so I may still actually get it on the ground. No, it's... So here's an example. If we look at the profile is way off. Why? I don't know. Normally, this would have been perfectly fine. Did I misread the chart? Did I misread that chart? Let's bring some flaps up and we'll bring it around and we'll land it on the go around. I don't think I misread that chart. 3,000. Well, 2,500 was at the 2,000 was at the feather, I guess. I may have misread that. I'm seeing an indicator of 2,000, so we'll bring this thing back up.
Too low, terrain. Too low, terrain.
Now, there would be a normal go-around for this, but that's to say there'd be a normal go-around procedure for this. And if we looked at the at the chart, it will actually tell us, you know, what is the procedure for going around. I typically don't use them. Maybe I should, but I don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just manually fly the aircraft into a go around pattern that of my choosing, basically. Bring that thing back up to 3,000, not that high, 3,000. We'll bring it up to 5,000. And we'll, there we go. Heading. Climb. Okay. So I'm bringing it back down to 5,000 where I want to be. My speed is not armed, so we're gonna control our speed a bit better. We're way out of control here. So we're slowing it down now is what I'm saying. The plan is to take it just beyond the feathers and then turn it back in onto the feathers, and then use the audio approach to hopefully control it and bring it where it needs to be. I think what I'll do is I will get this to the 2,000 altitude, because I think that'll give me a better result. So we're going to descend. We're going to be turning here shortly. Now our course for this is what? What is the course? Usually it tells me that right here. So 51 degrees. So we're going to turn. We're going to turn 90 degrees off of where we are now, and then we'll turn another 90 degrees onto the 51 degree course. And at some point, we'll hit the auto approach, and it should, knock on wood, it should land. But yeah, okay. So let's do that. Let's turn our direction now. We are here, so we want to be. Something about there. So I'm using this little dotted line here off of 90 degrees from where we were, and that's how I'm planning out my 90 degree turn. And because we're 210, or going to be 210, I can have at least 2 notches down. I'm trying to slow the aircraft down a bit, you can see. I think I better bring it up to 3,000. So we're going to get pretty low here if we don't. Oh, I missed my turn already. Okay, let's get that turned in. So you see that diamond right there? That's the important thing right there. So we're turning in. I'm going to attempt the auto approach once we get turned a bit more. So we're kind of coming off the. I didn't turn that final 90 degrees soon enough. I should have done that a little sooner, because right now we're parallel with the runway, but we're probably off the other side of it, you know, off to the right side, the left side of it by 3-4 miles. A couple miles anyways, at least. So there's the intersection that we want. There's the Auckland International. So I've hit the auto approach button. There's the diamond. This is the diamond right to left alignment. And this diamond is going to start falling, and when it falls to this point here, the altitude hold is going to trip, and the aircraft is, all things equal, should start falling down out of the sky. And when I say fall, start its approach down. That's kind of what I meant. Anyways, let us change our speed down to 185. 180. 180 is good. It's important to not forget that. I was unfortunately it was too high, and I'm going to say that the flight, the approach, the ILS got buggered up because I changed something in the legs page, and I didn't compensate for that change. Diamond's at the halfway point. As soon as it dips below that halfway point, the aircraft's altitude hold should trip, and it should start coming down to achieve the given altitude that it needs. It's not there. No, it's it's trying to. Again, we're going to be too high. It should be falling, not maintaining 3,000. I'm going to let it turn and align, and then I'm going to manually take the flight in. Something is off. This is one of the first few times, of course, when I'm recording a video that it's actually doing this. May end up recording this all over again because I'm unhappy about what it's doing. Anyways, I'm going to disengage, throttle back, remove auto approach. Let's stop the necessity beeping, and let's line her up. Let's get it down. It's starting to fall down out of the sky. Have I got the gear down? I do. The runway's there, just I'm coming in on it here shortly. We're still descending here. Fairly hefty, because you can see that diamond. It's now starting to come closer and closer to profile. Profile would be right in the center mark there. Our speed is slowing down. We're going to be in good shape here shortly. We're at 150, which is fine. We're still a little too high, so let's just let this thing come down a bit more. Keep in mind, I still got 13 degrees of trim. Flaps are full. Gear is down. We look outside. We can probably see. Oh, I'm gonna disengage that. Those speed brakes. So now I'm a little on the high side of things, or a little on the low side of things, I should say. So we're gonna throttle up a bit. Yeah.
Slow. Glide slow.
Feels like we got somewhat of a crosswind coming
Glide
here.
slope. Glide 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 slope.
And we're here. Trying to get her slowed down. Reverses off. Flaps are going up. So that was a little shaky. Typically I don't have that problem. I'm not sure what I did, but I'm likely not to publish this. I'm probably going to do it again because I want to understand what happened there. But if I do publish it, I think the reasoning for it, the primary reasoning for it, was I think I was too high. I just did not intercept the glide slope. And in this case, you heard glide slope, glide slope, glide slope. I was too low. But that's okay. So as we begin our taxi, typically I think what would happen is you would start the APU up so that when you got to the gate, you'd shut the engines off and you'd have power and you'd have heating and cooling for passengers, offboarding and onboarding. So what that procedure might look like would be, something as simple as you'd have a co-pilot, obviously, and your co-pilot would be, or the captain would be, whoever's not managing the aircraft would be managing those systems to, i.e., get the APU fired up and running and that kind of stuff. I typically, what I'll do is, I normally as I get off the runway, I would stop the aircraft, clean it up, meaning, get the flaps to zero, get the speed brakes up. This is kind of a weird spot. Brakes on. So, yeah, like I say, normally I would clean up the aircraft and I would start the APU, and I'm just going to kind of go through what that procedure might look like a little bit. So, it's fairly simple. APU is on. Start. Again, we're going to wait for that temperature to come up. We want to have the APU up and running before we shut the engines off / the engine generators off, because if we did that ahead of time, we'd have no AC power, and we need to have AC power here to get everything running. So there comes the APU. We're going to see these the gen light come back on, and when I see that gen light come back on, that's when I'm going to pull the fuel off, hit the fuel pumps, leave the aft on, but to hit the other fuel pumps off, and shut the main engines down. Typically what I do is when I shut the engines down, I just click both the fuels. I don't know if there's an actual process that you should use for that, but that's typically what I do. I suspect there probably is. You shut this engine off first and then you shut that engine off. There's probably a cool down process that you should adhere to. I can only assume that that'd be the case. Cool down. So we'll put these gens on. There they are. So now we're going to shut the engines down. I shut them down using the fuel selector switches. And you should see, as you shut them down, you should see this start to come down as it is. I'll do the same on that one. Our APU gens are on. We want to shut these fuel pumps off because we don't need them. We want to shut the anti-icing off because we don't need it. We don't care about windscreen at this point. We don't care about pitot heat at this point. We do want APU bleed on, so we're bleeding air into the cabin. You can see right there. And now you would call in ATC, watch this not work again, but you would call in ATC and you'd say, I want to have ATC ground. Is that what I want? Gate taxi. No, I don't want that. What I'm looking for is the ground control to taxi to gates. I'm at the gates already. Anyways, you would normally be at the gate and say, hey, connect the jetway, and the jetway would connect itself. Passengers off, passengers reload, and then you push back, start the engines, and take your next flight away. Right. I'm likely to recreate this just because I'm unhappy with the final approach and the landing and everything else. But if I don't, you've seen kind of, the steps and the processes throughout, with the exception of the blunder on the final approach, it not coming in properly. And again, I think that's just because I just was too high. I should have reduced the altitude to some degree instead of being at 3,000 feet. I was less worried about the above 3,000 feet than I should have been. I should have spent more time understanding and reading the chart a little bit, which I didn't do. Anyways, this is Stream Gamers. My name is Raymond, and this has been another tutorial on how to do something, on how I do it. So enjoy it, and if there's any suggestions for other tutorials, please let me know in the comment sections below, and I will do so. Right. I will bid you adieu. Bye-bye.